loneliest emo wolf girl, who followed me home from the woods. The sky above the northern hemisphere of Kalo Prime was the color of a bruised plum. Heavy clouds pressed down on the jagged tree line, promising a storm that would bury the valley in silence for weeks. Heath adjusted the strap of his heavy pack and shifted his weight. His boots crunched against the permafrost. The air tasted of pine needles and incoming snow. It was a sharp and clean scent that he preferred over the recycled air of the inner colonies. He had spent 10 years in the fleet and another 5 working security on the orbital docks. Silence was the most expensive commodity in the galaxy, and he had spent his life savings to buy this patch of nowhere.
Looks like the heaters are going to be working overtime tonight.
He spoke to no one. It was a habit he had picked up during long solo patrols. His voice was rough, like gravel tumbling in a dryer, but it filled the empty space around him. He hiked up the final ridge toward his cabin. The structure was built from treated cedar and reinforced steel, designed to withstand the harsh winters of this sector. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. The automated systems were doing their job. He looked forward to a hot meal and the bottle of amber whiskey sitting on his mantel. He stopped. Something was wrong. The stillness of the forest felt brittle. The birds had stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Heath unclipped the safety on the heavy pistol holstered at his hip. He did not draw it yet. He scanned the perimeter of his property. The snow near the woodpile was disturbed.
Drags. Too erratic for a deer. Too heavy for a fox.
He followed the markings. They dragged through the snow, leaving a wide furrow that suggested something wounded or exhausted. Then he saw the color. It was not the bright red of oxygenated mammalian blood. It was a shimmering, iridescent silver that caught the fading light and reflected it like mercury.
That is not local wildlife.
The trail led directly to his equipment shed. The heavy door was slightly ajar, swinging mere inches in the breeze. The rusted hinges groaned. Heath drew his weapon. He held the pistol with a practiced grip, keeping his elbows bent and his center of gravity low. He moved toward the shed with silent, deliberate steps. He did not know what kind of creature bled silver, but on Kalo Prime, most things with teeth were genetically engineered leftovers from the terraforming wars.
Come out. I know you are in there.
There was no answer, only the sound of ragged, wet breathing.
I am armed. Step out where I can see you.
A shadow shifted in the darkness of the shed. Heath tightened his finger on the trigger. He expected a predator. He expected claws and fangs and blind aggression. Instead, he saw a girl. She was huddled in the corner behind a stack of fuel cells. She looked fragile, her frame slight and shivering violently. She wore tattered black rags that hung off her body in strips, offering absolutely no protection against the freezing temperature. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, contrasting sharply with the dark soil smudged across her cheeks. But it was her eyes that froze Heath in place. They were an intense, electric blue that seemed to glow in the gloom. They were terrified. Heath lowered the barrel of his gun by a fraction of an inch.
You are human.
She did not speak. She bared her teeth, and a low growl vibrated in her chest. It was a sound that did not belong in a human throat. It was deep, resonant, and primal. Heath noticed the heavy iron chain bracelet clamped around her left wrist. It was thick, industrial-grade metal, the kind used to secure cargo crates or heavy machinery. The jagged end of a broken link dangled from it.
That looks heavy.
The girl pressed herself further into the corner. Her hand went to the wound on her leg. Silver blood oozed between her fingers. She was losing vitality fast. The cold was already turning her lips a shade of violet.
I am not going to hurt you.
He holstered his weapon. It was a calculated risk. If she was a hybrid, she could likely move faster than he could react. But showing a weapon to a cornered animal was the surest way to get bitten. He held up his hands, palms open.
My name is Heath. This is my land. You are bleeding on my floor.
The girl watched his hands. Her gaze darted to the pistol on his hip and then back to his face. She seemed to be calculating the distance between them. She tried to stand, bracing herself against the wall. Her legs shook. She managed to rise halfway before her strength gave out. She pitched forward. Heath moved before he processed the decision. He closed the distance in 2 strides and caught her before she hit the concrete floor. She was surprisingly heavy. Her bone density was clearly higher than a standard human's. She flinched at his touch, her muscles coiling tight as wire, but she lacked the energy to fight him.
Easy. I have you.
She looked up at him. Up close, he could see the black lipstick that was smeared across her mouth, and the dark circles under her eyes. She looked like the kids he used to see in the sub-city districts, the ones who dressed in darkness to hide from the neon lights. But the chain on her wrist told a different story.
They are coming.
Her voice was a rasp, dry and cracked.
Who is coming?
The white coats.
She gripped the flannel of his shirt with desperate strength. Her fingernails were sharp, digging into the fabric.
Nobody is coming up this mountain tonight. The storm is about to break. If they are out there, they will freeze before they reach the tree line.
He scooped her up into his arms. The iron chain swung against his side with a dull clank. The heat radiating from her body was alarming. She was burning up with fever.
We need to get you warm.
He carried her out of the shed. The wind had picked up, howling through the tops of the redwoods. Snow began to fall in earnest, large flakes that stuck to his beard and melted on the girl's feverish skin. He kicked the shed door shut behind him and marched toward the cabin. Mora rested her head against his shoulder. She stopped growling. The rhythm of his heartbeat seemed to settle her. She was a weapon of war, a creature designed for violence. But in this moment, she was just a girl who had run until she could not run anymore.
You picked a hell of a place to hide.
He reached the front porch and keyed the biometric lock. The heavy steel door hissed open, spilling warm yellow light onto the snow. He stepped inside, carrying the fugitive across the threshold. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that his quiet life on Kalo Prime had just ended. He kicked the door shut, sealing out the cold and the world beyond. The interior of the cabin smelled of aged cedar and the sharp, clean tang of medical antiseptic. Heath laid Mora down on his heavy oak kitchen table, which was the only surface large enough to serve as a makeshift gurney. Outside, the wind screamed against the reinforced steel shutters, a violent reminder that they were entirely alone in the wilderness of Kalo Prime. He moved with practiced efficiency, pulling a high-grade trauma kit from the cabinet beneath the sink, while the girl watched him with wide, cautious eyes.
Try to stay still and breathe through the discomfort. This liquid bandage is going to sting like a swarm of hornets, but it is the only way to close a wound this deep without stitches.
Mora gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white against her pale skin. Her blue eyes were swimming with a mixture of agony and defiance, yet she did not pull away when he approached. She watched him use a pair of surgical shears to cut away the tattered black fabric around the deep gash on her thigh. The silver blood shimmered under the warm LED lights of the kitchen, looking more like liquid mercury than something biological.
You should have left me in the woods to freeze. They will burn this entire mountain down just to find a single strand of my hair.
Let them try their luck. This cabin is rated for orbital debris strikes, and I have spent the last 5 years making sure it is the safest place on the planet. Besides, I have never been much of a bystander when someone is in trouble.
He cleaned the wound with a steady hand, marveling at the underlying structure of her physiology. He had seen plenty of injuries during his decade in the fleet, but nothing quite like this. The muscle tissue beneath her skin was dense and braided with faint metallic fibers that caught the light when she moved. She was a masterwork of illegal bioengineering, a living weapon disguised as a vulnerable girl. He applied the pressurized sealant, and Mora let out a sharp, ragged gasp that echoed in the quiet room.
Why are you helping me when you do not even know what I am? I was made in a laboratory on the dark side of a distant moon. They called me Project Lycion, but I chose the name Mora for myself because I wanted something that belonged only to me.
I do not care where you were manufactured or what label they put on your file. I spent 15 years taking orders from men who thought they owned the stars and everyone on them. I retired to this rock because I wanted to be the only person who decided what I did with my time. Right now, I am deciding to make sure you do not bleed out on my kitchen floor.
He finished bandaging her leg and stepped back to assess his work, satisfied that the bleeding had stopped. The iron chain on her wrist clinked as she shifted her weight, the heavy metal looking primitive and cruel against her frame. He reached for a heavy-duty laser cutter on his workbench, but she pulled her arm back instinctively with a look of pure terror.
Do not touch that chain.
Heath slowly lowered the laser cutter and placed it on the far end of the workbench. He could see the pulse in Mora's neck fluttering like a trapped bird. Her fear was a physical thing that filled the small kitchen, sharper than the scent of the antiseptic he had used on her leg. He held up his hands to show they were empty, keeping his movements slow and predictable.
I hear you. I will not touch the chain if it scares you that much. I thought it was just a remnant of whatever cage they kept you in, but I see now it is something more.
It is a leash that never sleeps. If the metal is breached, a high-frequency signal goes straight to the orbital relay. They would be here before the snow settles.
She pulled her knees up to her chest, her tattered black rags providing little comfort against the chill that still clung to her skin. The heavy iron bracelet looked massive on her thin wrist, a brutal contrast to her fragile appearance. Heath leaned against the counter, crossing his arms over his flannel shirt as he watched her.
Why did they put it on you? You do not look like someone who needs an iron shackle to stay in line.
You have seen my blood, Heath. You know I am not what I seem. The chain is a dampener that suppresses the predatory response of my genetic code. Without it, I am less of a girl and more of a catastrophe.
I have seen plenty of catastrophes in my time, and most of them wore expensive suits and sat in air-conditioned offices. You just look like someone who is tired of running.
Mora looked down at her black lipstick, her thumb tracing the edge of her lower lip. She seemed to be weighing his words, searching for the lie that usually came from men who were larger and stronger than her. Finding none, she allowed her shoulders to drop just a fraction of an inch.
I have been running since I learned how to walk. This is the first time I have stopped to catch my breath without looking over my shoulder every second.
Then keep catching it. I have got enough supplies to last us through the season, and the storm is only getting worse. Nobody is coming up that mountain tonight.
The night passed in a series of long, heavy silences. Heath stayed in the armchair by the fire, his hand never far from the holster at his hip. Mora eventually drifted into a fitful sleep on the sofa, her fingers still gripped tightly around the iron chain. When the first gray light of morning began to bleed through the shutters, it brought no warmth, only a grim clarity. Heath was brewing a pot of strong coffee when the proximity sensors on the perimeter fence chimed. It was a low, rhythmic tone that only he could hear through his earpiece. He set the pot down and moved to the window, peering through a narrow gap in the steel reinforcements. Two figures were struggling through the waist-deep drifts toward the porch.
Mara, wake up. We have company.
She was on her feet in an instant, her movements fluid and silent. The blue of her eyes seemed to glow with a faint, predatory light in the dimness of the cabin. She looked toward the door, her nostrils flaring as she caught a scent that made her growl low in her throat.
They are here. I can smell the chemicals they use to treat their tactical gear.
It is not a recovery team yet. It is the local ranger and a government enforcer. Get into the crawl space under the pantry. There is a false panel behind the crates of emergency rations.
You cannot lie to them. They will know you are hiding something the moment they look at your face.
I have spent half my life lying to officers who thought they were smarter than me. Just stay down there and do not make a sound, no matter what you hear.
He waited until she had disappeared beneath the floorboards before he unbolted the heavy door. A blast of freezing air and powdered snow swirled into the room as Grant and Nadine pushed their way inside. Grant was a tall man with a face like a hatchet and eyes that never stopped moving. Nadine looked exhausted, her ranger uniform frosted with ice.
God, Heath, I thought we were going to freeze to death 10 feet from your porch. Thank you for opening up.
I told you last month that the North Trail is a death trap in a storm like this, Nadine. What are you doing out here?
We are on official business, Heath. A high-priority asset was lost during a transport transition near the ridge. We are checking every structure within a 50-mile radius.
Grant did not wait for an invitation to sit. He began to pace the perimeter of the room, his gloved hands touching the back of the sofa and the edge of the kitchen table. He stopped at the workbench and picked up the heavy iron chain that Heath had left out the night before.
This is an interesting piece of hardware for a retired soldier to have lying around. It looks like high-grade dampener alloy.
It is scrap from a freighter crash 3 years ago. I was planning on melting it down for door hinges, but the metal is too stubborn for my forge.
It is more than stubborn. It is calibrated to a specific biosignature. This is the kind of tech they use to keep Project Lycan units from eating their handlers.
Grant reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, circular device. He tapped the surface, and a holographic bounty puck flickered into life in the center of the room. It showed a high-resolution image of Mora. She looked younger in the photo, her face clean of dirt, but the intensity in her blue eyes was unmistakable.
The hegemony is offering enough credits for this girl to buy a private moon in the mid-rim. They say she is armed and extremely dangerous.
We are just looking for information, Heath. If you have seen anything unusual, you need to tell us. This is not the kind of trouble you want at your doorstep.
I have been living here for 5 years because I do not want any trouble at all. I have seen plenty of snow and a few hungry wolves, but nothing that looks like a girl in tattered rags.
Grant walked over to the pantry door, his boots heavy on the wooden floorboards. He stopped directly over the spot where Mora was hiding. He looked down, his eyes narrowing as he noticed a slight scuff mark on the wood that had not been there the day before.
You always were a bad liar, Heath. I can smell the antiseptic from here. It is a very specific brand, the kind they issue to fleet medics.
I cut my hand fixing the heater yesterday. If you are here to critique my first aid skills, you are wasting your time.
I think I would like to do a full sweep of the property. For your own safety, of course. We would hate for a dangerous biological asset to be hiding in your cellar while you sleep.
Heath stepped into Grant's path, his stature imposing despite his relaxed posture. He did not reach for his weapon, but the threat was clear in the way he shifted his weight. He looked Grant in the eye, refusing to flinch as the enforcer reached for the stun baton on his belt.
You are standing in my home, Grant. You do not have a warrant, and you do not have my permission to go poking through my floorboards.
Grant, take it easy. Heath is a decorated veteran. There is no reason to be aggressive.
The only reason I need is that bounty puck. It is vibrating, Heath. That means the asset is within 50 meters of this device.
The tension in the room snapped like a frozen branch. Heath realized that the dampener chain on the workbench was not just scrap, but a homing device that Grant's puck was actively pinging. He had tried to protect her by hiding her, but the very thing that bound her was now betraying them both. He looked at Nadine, hopping to find an ally, but her face was a mask of professional duty.
If you do this, there is no going back. You are choosing a paycheck over a life.
I am choosing a paycheck over a monster. Now move aside, or I will put you down along with it.
Heath felt a surge of protective fury that he had not experienced in years. He realized in that moment that Mora was not just a fugitive he had found in the woods. She was a person who had chosen to trust him when the rest of the galaxy had treated her like a weapon. He straightened his back, his eyes hardening into flint.
Then you had better be faster than you look.
Below the floorboards, the low growl of a cornered predator echoed through the vents. The air in the cabin grew heavy with the weight of an impending storm that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Heath stood his ground, a lone man defending a girl who had finally found a home. The vibration beneath the floorboards grew into a resonant snarl that shook the dust from the cracks in the wood. Grant did not hesitate. He swung his stun baton in a brutal arc, forcing Heath to recoil toward the kitchen island to avoid the crackling blue tip. With the path clear, Grant drove his heavy boot into the loose timber. The wood splintered with a sharp crack, exposing the dark cavity below.
Come out, asset, or I will drag you out by your hair.
A hand shot out from the darkness. It was pale and smeared with grease, the fingernails elongated into jagged, translucent claws. Mora lunged from her hiding spot with a speed that blurred the air. She slammed into Grant's chest armor, her teeth bared in a feral hiss. The impact sent Grant staggering back, but he was a professional. He activated the shock charge on his baton and drove it into her side.
Gaza.
The scream was human, piercing and full of pain. Mora convulsed and collapsed onto the rug, her limbs twitching as the voltage disrupted her nervous system. She curled into a ball, clutching her ribs, looking less like a monster and more like a broken child. Grant stood over her, breathing hard, his face twisted in disgust. He raised the baton for a second strike to incapacitate her completely.
Do not touch her again.
Heath leveled his heavy pistol at Grant. His hands were steady, anchored by a cold fury that had replaced his earlier caution. Nadine stepped forward, her eyes wide as she looked at the girl on the floor. She saw the tattered rags, the chain on the wrist, and the terrified blue eyes that were swimming with tears.
Grant, stand down. She is subdued. You do not need to hit her again.
This thing is a biological weapon, Nadine. It does not feel pain like we do. It just processes damage data. Look at the claws. That is military-grade genetic splicing.
Mara looked up at Heath, her chest heaving. The black lipstick on her mouth made her skin look impossibly pale. She tried to push herself up, but her muscles were still locked from the shock. She looked small against the heavy timber of the cabin, a fragile anomaly in a world of steel and ice.
She is a girl, Grant, and you are trespassing in my home.
I am securing a payday, and you are looking at an obstruction charge.
A sharp, rhythmic chirping sound cut through the tension. It was coming from the iron bracelet on the workbench. The tempo of the beep increased rapidly, syncing with a low, thrumming vibration that rattled the window panes. The coffee mug on the table slid an inch to the left.
What is that?
That is the cavalry.
The roar of atmospheric thrusters drowned out the wind outside. It was a deep, bone-shaking bass note that signaled heavy tonnage. The light from the windows shifted from the gray of the storm to a blinding white wash as floodlights cut through the snow. This was not a standard patrol shuttle. This was a siege breaker.
You called in a warship for one girl.
I called for extraction. I did not expect them to send a destroyer.
Heath looked at the ceiling, calculating the structural integrity against the downdraft. He realized the truth in that instant. The corporation that made Mora was not interested in retrieving their property. They were here to erase a mistake.
They are not here to pay you, Grant. They are here to sanitize the site.
Don't be ridiculous. I have valid clearance codes.
Think about it. She escaped a secure facility. She has seen the outside. She has interacted with civilians. Do you think they are going to leave witnesses? You mean Nadine? We are all loose ends now.
Grant hesitated. He looked at the heavy Durasteel bracelet beeping on the table, then at the terrified girl, and finally at the blinding lights outside. The sheer scale of the response did not match a simple recovery operation. The cabin groaned as the landing gear of the massive ship crushed the tree line 50 meters away.
Heath is right, Grant. That is a scorched earth protocol. I saw it on the border wars. They burn everything to protect the tech.
I followed procedure.
Procedure just got us killed.
Nadine drew her service weapon. She did not aim it at the girl. She swung the barrel toward Grant. Her face was pale, but set with a grim determination.
Drop the baton, Grant. We are leaving.
You are making a mistake. You are throwing away your career.
I am saving my life. Drop it.
Grant cursed and tossed the baton onto the sofa. The roar outside was deafening now. The soldiers would be fast roping down any second. Heath holstered his pistol and scooped Mara up from the floor. She flinched at his touch, a low growl rumbling in her throat as the stress threatened to trigger her transformation.
Mara, listen to me. I need you to hold it together. Can you run?
The noise. It hurts my head. They are so loud.
Focus on my voice. Just my voice. We are going to the shed.
Heath grabbed his emergency pack and a heavy thermal parka. He threw the coat over Mara's shivering shoulders. He looked around the cabin one last time. The books on the shelves, the warm fire, the bottle of whiskey on the mantel. It was the only peace he had known in 20 years.
Nadine, cover the rear. Grant, you're carrying the ammo crate. If you try to run, I will let the wolf catch you.
You are insane.
Heath kicked the back door open. The blizzard assaulted them instantly, a wall of biting ice and wind. They spilled out into the deep snow, moving toward the equipment shed. The sky above was dominated by the dark hull of the destroyer, its engines glowing like angry eyes. Armored figures were descending on lines, their thermal optics scanning the clearing.
Get down. In the trench.
They slid into the drainage ditch that ran behind the woodpile. The snow was waist-deep. Mara moved with a loping, unnatural grace, her bare feet ignoring the cold. Heath stopped and pulled a flare canister from his belt. He looked back at his cabin.
What are you doing? They will see the heat signature.
I am giving them something brighter to look at.
Heath twisted the cap on the flare and tossed it, not at the soldiers, but through the broken back door of his cabin, directly toward the fuel drums feeding the generator. He turned and shoved Nadine forward.
Run.
The explosion was a concussive punch that knocked the wind out of them. The cabin disintegrated in a ball of orange fire. The blast wave sent debris spinning into the night, and the intense heat bloomed outward, blinding the thermal sensors of the dropship above. For a few precious seconds, the enemy was blind. They scrambled to the shed. Heath slammed his shoulder against the frozen metal door, forcing it open. Inside, the air smelled of grease and cold iron. The old atmospheric skiff sat under a tarp, a relic from the war that Heath had been restoring for years.
Will this fly?
It has to. Get in.
Heath vaulted into the pilot's seat. Nadine shoved Grant into the cargo hold and jumped into the gunner's chair. Heath flipped the ignition sequence. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life, shaking the rust off the frame.
Hold on to something.
He slammed the throttle forward. The skiff surged, crashing through the shed doors and bursting out into the chaotic night. The burning remains of the cabin lit the snow in violent hues of red and gold. Soldiers on the ground opened fire, streaks of green plasma zipping past the canopy.
We are taking fire. Shields are down.
I know. I am trying to get altitude.
Heath yanked the stick back. The skiff groaned under the G-force, shooting upward at a steep angle. They punched through the smoke of the explosion, rising toward the storm clouds. The destroyer rotated slowly, its massive turrets tracking their vector.
Heath, the display.
Mara pointed at the radar screen. A red lock-on diamond was flashing. A missile had been fired.
I see it. Mara, can you interface with the countermeasures? The manual controls are jammed.
I don't know how.
You said you were made for this. Connect to it. Use the port.
Mara ripped the glove off her right hand. She jammed her fingers into the open data port on the console. Her eyes rolled back, glowing with a faint silver luminescence. The ship system screamed as she forced a connection, her bio-digital physiology overriding the ancient computer.
Got it.
The skiff lurched violently to the left, deploying a spread of chaff and flares automatically. The missile streaked past them, detonating harmlessly in a cloud of aluminum foil and fire. The shockwave rattled their teeth, but they were still flying.
Good work. Now hang on, we're punching through the cloud layer.
The skiff shuddered as it hit the turbulence of the upper atmosphere. The black sky of space began to bleed through the gray. Heath looked over at Mara. She was slumped in the seat, exhausted, blood trickling from her nose. She looked at him, and then down at the burning speck on the ground that had been his home.
You burned it. You destroyed everything you had.
Not everything.
Heath looked at her, then at Nadine and Grant in the back. He had lost the cabin, the solitude, and the quiet life he had bought with his pension. But as he looked at the girl who had fought a warship to save them, he felt a strange sense of clarity.
A house is just wood and nails, Mara. You are a life. There is a difference.
The skiff broke orbit, drifting into the silent vacuum of space. The stars stretched out before them, cold and infinite. They were alive. They were fugitives. And for the first time in a long time, Heath did not feel alone.
Where do we go now, Heath? We are wanted criminals.
We go to the one place they won't look. The outer rim.
Heath set the nav computer for the edge of the system. The chase was far from over, but the wolf girl and the soldier had won the first round. Mara rested her head against the cool glass of the canopy, watching the planet Caloprime shrink into a blue marble behind them. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life she slept without fear. The interior of the small skiff smelled of scorched copper and recycled air as it drifted through the star-studded silence of the upper atmosphere. Heath kept his hands steady on the flight controls, his eyes locked on the long-range scanners. Behind him, the blue and white marble of Caloprime looked peaceful, showing no signs of the chaos they had left behind on the surface. Nadine was hunched over the secondary console, her fingers flying across the holographic interface as she tried to scrub their flight path from the local satellite records. Grant sat in the narrow jump seat near the airlock, his expression unreadable as he stared at the floor.
We are clear of the immediate orbital defense grid, but we are not out of the woods yet.
I have successfully looped the transmission from the orbital buoy. If anyone looks at the logs, it will appear as though we suffered a catastrophic engine failure and disintegrated during the ascent.
They are not going to believe that for long. The hegemony keeps a very close eye on their high-value assets. Once they find no debris in the crash zone, they will start scanning the neighboring sectors.
Then we need to be long gone before they start looking. Mara, how are you holding up?
Mara stirred in the co-pilot seat, her breathing shallow but steady. The silver blood on her chin had dried into a shimmering crust, and her blue eyes flickered open as she looked at Heath. She reached out with a trembling hand, touching the edge of the flight console where the data port remained open.
I can still hear them. The signals are distant, but the fleet is talking. They are angry, Heath.
Let them be angry. They are shouting at a ghost. We are heading for the Voritau system. It is a dense cluster of asteroid mines and rogue trading posts where the hegemony has no jurisdiction.
You gave up your home for me. You burned the only place where you felt safe.
I told you before, Mora. A house is just a collection of materials. I can build another one. I cannot build another soul.
Mora looked away, her gaze fixed on the infinite blackness outside the canopy. She reached for the heavy iron bracelet on her wrist, but her fingers found only bare skin. Heath had managed to cut the shackle away before they boarded the skiff, leaving only a faint red mark where the metal had pressed against her for years.
I do not know how to be a person without the weight of the chain.
You start by making your own choices. For example, you can choose what to eat for dinner once we find a station that serves something other than protein paste.
A sharp beep echoed through the cabin, and a red light began to pulse on the primary HUD. Nadine gasped, her hands hovering over the sensor array as she magnified a section of the space behind them.
We have a problem. A high-speed interceptor just broke orbit. It is moving at 3 times our current velocity.
That is a Vanguard-class hunter. It belongs to my old unit. They must have been waiting for a heat signature to pop above the cloud layer.
Grant, if you are going to betray us, now would be the time to say so.
I am a lot of things, Heath, but I am not a suicide enthusiast. If that ship catches us, I am a witness to a failed recovery mission. They will execute me right alongside you. Give me the tactical override. I know the frequency of their targeting sensors.
Heath hesitated for a fraction of a second, his gaze meeting Grant's in the reflection of the glass. He saw no deception there, only the cold pragmatism of a man who knew he was already a dead man walking. Heath tapped a command on his screen, transferring the electronic warfare suite to Grant's station.
Do not make me regret this.
Just keep flying straight. I am going to feed them a false gravity shadow.
The skiff bucked as Grant pushed the ship's electronic signature into a localized loop. On the scanner, their icons split into 3 separate blips, each heading in a different direction. The interceptor slowed, its pilot confused by the sudden ghosting of the target.
They are turning. They are following the shadow toward the gas giant.
Good work, Grant. Nadine, prep the jump drive. We are taking the short route through the nebula.
That is dangerous territory for a ship this size. The radiation could fry our life support.
I would rather take my chances with the stars than a hegemony firing squad. Punch it.
The stars stretched into long ribbons of light as the skiff lurched forward, jumping into the chaotic swirls of the Voritau Nebula. The transition was violent, tossing the passengers against their restraints as the small vessel fought against the shifting gravitational currents. After several minutes of intense vibration, the ship smoothed out, drifting into the calm, purple-hued clouds of the outer rim. They were safe for now. The vastness of the nebula acted as a natural shield, masking their energy signature from any pursuers. Heath let out a long, slow breath and unbuckled his harness. He stood up, his joints popping after the tension of the flight, and walked over to the small storage locker at the back of the cabin.
I kept a spare flight suit in here for emergencies. It will be a bit large on you, but it beats those rags you are wearing.
He handed a bundle of dark blue fabric to Mora. She took it, her fingers brushing against his. The warmth of the contact seemed to ground her, and for the first time since they had met in the shed, a small, genuine smile touched her lips.
Thank you, Heath, for everything.
We are a team now. All of us. Nadine, Grant, I expect you both to find a way to make yourselves useful once we reach the station.
I was a ranger, Heath. I can handle the logistics and the scouting. I am not going back to Kalo Prime.
And I know how the hegemony thinks. If you want to stay hidden, you are going to need someone who knows where they are looking.
Heath nodded, acknowledging the strange alliance they had formed in the fire of the night. He walked back to the front of the ship and sat down next to Mora. The nebula outside was beautiful, filled with glowing dust and the distant light of newborn suns.
What happens when we get to the station?
We find a new path. There are thousands of worlds out here that do not care about bounties or genetic experiments. We will find a place where you can see the sky without looking for hunters.
I would like to see a forest again, a real one without the ice.
I will find you the greenest forest in the galaxy, Mora. I promise.
Mora leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes closing as the exhaustion finally claimed her. Heath stayed awake, watching the sensors and the stars, feeling a sense of peace that he had never found in his solitude. He had lost his cabin and his quiet life, but as he felt the steady heartbeat of the girl beside him, he knew he had gained something far more valuable. They were fugitives, hunted and alone in the vastness of space. But for the first time in his life, Heath felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The skiff sailed deeper into the nebula, a tiny spark of light moving toward a future that was finally theirs to write. The violet mist of the Voritau Nebula thinned, revealing the jagged silhouette of the Ethelgard. It was less a ship and more a floating city of welded steel and salvaged hull plating, drifting like a heavy island in the cosmic stream. Lights flickered along its spine, signaling the presence of thousands of souls who lived on the edge of the law.
That is our exit ticket. The captain owes me a favor from the siege of Tannis. He runs supplies to the terraforming colonies on the rim.
Does he ask questions?
Only about how much credits we have.
Good thing you keep a rainy day fund, Heath.
Heath adjusted the controls, bringing the small skiff into alignment with the massive freighter's docking bay. The proximity alarms chirped a steady rhythm. Mara leaned forward in her seat. Her eyes were wide as she took in the scale of the vessel. It was ugly and industrial, scarred by asteroids and laser fire. But to her, it looked like a sanctuary.
There are so many people inside.
A few thousand, mostly refugees, miners, and people who do not want to be found. You will blend in.
The docking clamps engaged with a heavy metallic thud that reverberated through the skiff's hull. The airlock cycled, hissing as the pressure equalized. Heath stood up and offered a hand to Mora. She hesitated for a moment, looking down at the blue flight suit that had replaced her tattered rags. She ran a hand over the fabric, smoothing out the wrinkles.
I do not look like a monster anymore.
You never did. You just looked like someone who was hurting.
They gathered their few belongings. Grant checked the charge on his pistol, but left it holstered. Nadine shouldered her pack, looking more relieved than she had in days. As the ramp lowered, the sounds of the Ethelgard rushed in to meet them. It was a cacophony of shouting voices, clanking machinery, and music blaring from overhead speakers. The air smelled of recycled oxygen, spices, and engine grease.
I will go find the captain and secure our passage. Nadine, you should come with me. We need to procure supplies if we are going to make it to the outer colonies.
Right. I need to find a subspace transceiver too. I have to send a message to my sister, so she knows I am not dead.
Nadine paused near the bottom of the ramp. She looked at Heath, her expression softening.
You did good, Heath. I did not think you had it in you to care about anything this much again.
I surprise myself sometimes. Go. We will wait by the viewport on the observation deck.
Grant and Nadine disappeared into the bustling crowd of the docking bay, leaving Heath and Mora standing near the railing. Below them, workers loaded crates of hydroponic equipment and machine parts. Nobody looked twice at them. In the chaos of the Ethelgard, they were just two more travelers looking for a fresh start.
It is so loud.
You get used to it. It is the sound of life.
Mora looked at her wrist. The skin was still bruised where the iron manacle had been, a dark ring marking the years of her captivity. She rubbed the spot absently. Heath noticed the movement. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tin of medical salve he had swiped from the skiff's emergency kit.
Give me your arm.
Mora extended her hand. Heath opened the tin and gently applied the cool gel to her wrist. His fingers were calloused and rough, but his touch was incredibly gentle. Mora watched his face as he worked. The scowl that had defined him back on Kalo Prime was gone, replaced by a quiet focus.
Why did you do it?
Do what?
You burned down your home. You fought an army. You left everything you knew. I am a weapon, Heath. That is what they made me. Why would you risk your life for a weapon?
Heath capped the tin and looked up, meeting her intense blue gaze. The black lipstick she wore was faded now, smudged at the corners, revealing the human girl beneath the gothic exterior. He saw the fear that still lingered behind her eyes, the desperate need for a reason to exist that went beyond violence.
Because I know what it is like to be made into something you do not want to be. The military took 20 years of my life and turned me into a tool for their wars. When I came back, I did not know how to be a person anymore. I sat in that cabin and waited to die.
He looked out at the stars swirling beyond the thick glass of the viewport. The nebula was a painting of violet and gold, a vast frontier that promised endless possibilities.
Then I saw you. You were bleeding and terrified, but you were still fighting. You refused to let them break you. I realized that if I let them take you, I would lose the last part of myself that was worth saving.
You saved me because you were lonely.
I saved you because sometimes the loneliest people are the ones who recognize each other first.
Mora stayed silent for a long time. Then slowly, a smile broke across her face. It was not the predatory grin of the wolf, nor the terrified grimace of the fugitive. It was genuine and warm. She reached up and wiped the last of the black smudge from her lip, leaving her face clean.
I think I am done hiding.
Good, because we have a lot of living to do.
Grant and Nadine returned, carrying packs laden with ration bars and fresh water. Grant gave a thumbs up, signaling that their passage was secured. The massive engines of the Ethogard rumbled deep in the ship's belly, a vibration that traveled up through the floor plates. The freighter began to turn, orienting itself away from the nebula and toward the deep black ocean of the outer rim.
Where are we going first?
There is a planet called Valen 4. It is an agricultural world. No heavy industry, no military bases, just miles of green fields and forests that cover entire continents.
A forest without ice.
A forest where the leaves never fall.
Mara leaned her head against Heath's shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of a solemn vow. She was no longer the wounded creature in the snow. She was a traveler, a companion, and for the first time in her life she was free. Heath placed his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as the stars began to streak into lines of light.
Watch the window, Mora. Here comes the jump.
The ship surged forward, leaving the Voritau nebula behind. They vanished into the slipstream, racing toward a future that belonged only to them.